Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Center of Love. Whether this is your first time joining us or you've been part of our community for years, we're so grateful to have you here. For those of you who are new to the Center of Love, the center exists to explore one simple but profoundly challenging question. What becomes possible when love is the guiding principle of our lives? We come from many different backgrounds, cultures, professions, and spiritual traditions. Some of us have a faith tradition while others do not. Some are lifelong seekers, and some are just beginning to ask life's bigger questions. What brings us together isn't that we all believe the same things, it's that we all value the same things. We believe that every human being possesses inherent worth and dignity, and that we are all interconnected. And that love is not merely an emotion, but a force capable of transforming ourselves, our relationships, our communities, and perhaps even our world. Because of that, we strive to lead with love, to let love become the motive behind our thoughts, our words, and our actions. We're not here to tell anyone what to believe. We're here to create a space where curiosity is welcomed, questions are encouraged, and differences are celebrated. Our diversity isn't something we tolerate, it's something that enriches us. As Ollie likes to say, we are energized by diversity and unified in love. This morning's talk explores a question that has fascinated philosophers, spiritual teachers, historians, and ordinary people for thousands of years. If human beings are capable of such extraordinary compassion, why does history seem so full of conflict? Why do our differences so often become our divisions? Why do societies repeatedly find themselves trapped in circles of fear, competition, and struggle? And perhaps the most important question of all, is another way possible? Throughout history, countless people have tried to change the world through politics, religion, protest, and revolution. And yet, despite remarkable progress in many areas, humanity often seems to revisit the same patterns over and over again. Today's talk doesn't attempt to offer simple solutions or simple answers. Instead, it invites us to step back and look at the larger picture, to consider whether many of the challenges we face are not isolated problems, but symptoms of something much deeper. More importantly, it asks us to imagine what might happen if we organized our lives and perhaps one day even our society, not around fear, but around love. It's an invitation to explore patterns that have shaped civilizations for thousands of years and to ask whether a different future might be possible. One of the things I like most about this community is that we don't expect everyone to agree. In fact, we probably won't, and that's okay. Our goal isn't agreement, our goal is understanding. Because when people can sit together with different perspectives and still genuinely care for one another, something beautiful begins to happen. Conversation replaces combat, curiosity replaces certainty. Relationships become more important than being right. Perhaps that's one small glimpse of the world we're hoping to create. So today I invite you simply to listen with an open mind, to notice what resonates, to question what doesn't, and afterwards we can continue the conversation together. It is now my great pleasure to welcome one of my favorite humans, thinkers, and storytellers. Please join me in welcoming Ollie.
I always ask Candace to introduce me because I know she's going to say the nicest things about me. So if I need an ego boost. All right, my dear friends, welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here. And thank you for the folks joining us remotely as well. I noticed a couple of new faces on the Zoom call. Always a pleasure to see people leveraging technology. Okay, so about a month ago, Candace and I had lunch with Linda and Arno at My Chosen Cafe. And afterwards, as we were saying goodbye, Arno quietly took me aside. Something had been weighing on him about the center of love, but this wasn't the time or place to discuss it, he told me. So we made plans to go for coffee, and we did so a few weeks later. And what followed was what I would describe a classic Arno and Ollie conversation. It began with one simple question and quickly spiraled into philosophy, history, systems thinking, and possibility. The question that started this conversation completely took me off guard. He asked me, Ollie, what is the Center of Love's mission? Now, you'd think that I, of all people, would have a ready answer to this question, but I didn't. To spread love, to unify humanity. Those are nice sentiments, but that's not really a mission. What does all of that actually look like? How could a small community like ours possibly contribute to something so enormous? And how would we even know if we'd succeeded? Throughout our conversation, Arno kept returning to one core idea: the importance of leading by example. Now, that made perfect sense coming from Arno. His entire career was spent working in uncharted waters, or perhaps more accurately, uncharted ice. Time and again, he accomplished things that others considered impossible in his field. And he did this not by arguing that they were possible, but by quietly demonstrating that they were, leading by example. Now, at the time of our conversation, I didn't fully appreciate the connection between his question and this recurring theme, but afterwards, I reflected deeply on the question, on the example of Arno's career, and of course, on our community. And gradually, aided by what I like to call the great teacher, unseen connections began to reveal themselves. A story emerged, then a vision, and finally, a mission. I'd like to share that story with you today. If it resonates, wonderful. If it doesn't, I won't be offended, because this is my personal mission, and I'm sharing it with you to see if any would like to join. If you don't, nothing personal. But if you do, perhaps we can work together to amplify our message and our example together. So I would like to begin with a question too, the same way Arno did when we had coffee. What holds a community together? Some communities are bound by geography, same street, same town, same country. Others are united by shared interests. Maybe you went and watched some of the World Cup games with some of your friends. You're all soccer fans, or maybe you have a book club, or you're part of a political movement. Other communities are formed around identity, like ethnicity, profession, nationality, or religion. But what holds this community together? Surely it's not because we all think alike. If you spend 5 minutes here, and you'll quickly discover that's certainly not the case. We have artists and scientists, mystics and therapists, healers and skeptics. Some of us lean politically left, others to the right. Some of us don't even identify with politics at all. We're different ages, we come from different professional backgrounds, different spiritual paths. We are an incredibly diverse group. And I hope we always remain that way, because our diversity isn't a weakness or a liability. It's our greatest strength. That's why I often say that we are energized by diversity and unified in love. But that raises an important question, doesn't it? If diversity can be such an asset, such a strength, as our community demonstrates, why is it that humanity is so divided? We're often told that our differences are the problem. Different religions, different cultures, different political views, different medical decisions even. But when I look around this room, I know that's not true, because we have all of that diversity here, and we are a healthy, thriving community. Then I look at nature, our greatest teacher, and I see once again this truth illustrated. A healthy forest depends on biodiversity, not sameness. The beauty of the forest doesn't revolve around the fact that every tree is identical. To the contrary, it's the variety and the asymmetry of the different trees that make the forest beautiful. An orchestra depends on many different instruments and different notes in order to create beautiful music. Even your own body is made up of trillions of wildly different cells and different systems that cooperate together to create you. Life does not create unity through sameness. It creates harmony through diversity. Harmony is not uniformity. Harmony is diversity in relationship. So diversity itself clearly can't be the problem. Something else transforms difference into division. And personally, I think that something is fear. Fear whispers, if they're different, they're dangerous. Fear narrows our circle. It teaches us to cling to our people and to distrust those people. To compete in scarcity rather than to cooperate in abundance. Diversity doesn't divide us. Fear weaponizes diversity. And that's when it all starts. Left versus right. Red versus blue. Us versus them. Now, ever since I read this fine book that you can see here on the glass table, Sapiens, I've been fascinated by one idea that the author put forth in the book. He calls it imagined orders. He says human beings possess a remarkable ability, the ability to think about things that do not exist. Take a second to think about that. The ability to think about things that do not exist. No other animal on earth that we know of is capable of doing this, right? We're capable of cooperating in groups of millions because we believe in shared stories, imagined orders. What are some examples of these imagined orders that govern our lives? These stories. Well, money comes to mind. Countries, corporations, political parties, laws, and legislation. None of these things exist in nature the way mountains and rivers do. They exist because enough people collectively agree that they exist and behave as if they do. The ability to believe together is humanity's superpower. But every superpower has a shadow side. The first danger is that imagined orders become so familiar, so imminent, that we forget they're imaginary and that they depend on us for their power and existence. We forget this. How many times do we hear people talking about, well, we can't take care of the environment because it'll tank the economy? Which one of these is a natural order and which one of these is an imagined order? We're prioritizing the economy, which is a story that we all share, over the very earth that sustains us. So you see, we lose sight of the fact that these things are stories and not actual realities. And when that happens, people inevitably begin using those systems to serve themselves. And you can see this throughout all of recorded history, my friends, whether we call it a pharaoh or a king or an emperor or a prime minister or a president. One pattern appears again and again and again throughout history. The many governed by the few. Different civilizations, different cultures, different languages, but the architecture of power is unchanged. History keeps changing the costumes, but somehow the stage remains remarkably familiar. It's always the same pattern in different disguises. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not suggesting that certain politicians are the problem, or that certain political parties are the problem, or that certain nations are the problem. Because the moment we point to another group and declare they're the problem, we're now speaking in the language of fear. We've already begun speaking in the language of fear the moment we point fingers and assign blame. So instead, I'd like to suggest something different. Perhaps the problem isn't the people, but the pattern itself. Perhaps we've inherited a civilizational operating system that repeatedly concentrates power in ways that lend themselves to division, coercion, exploitation, and oppression. Not because everyone within the system is malicious, but because fear makes populations easier to organize. It makes people easier to govern, easier to manipulate, easier to divide, easier to exploit, easier to convince that their neighbor is the problem, easier to convince them to give up their freedoms in exchange for safety. Fear doesn't merely control people, it controls the stories people are willing to believe. Okay, now I know where you're going with this, and I will tell you right now that's not it. I'm not suggesting that our mission is to start a revolution. Definitely not. Because once again, history has shown us where revolutions lead. And since we have a whiteboard, I'm going to show you real quick. Does anyone know what the actual, like the literal meaning of the word revolution? What's the actual meaning of it? Like we talk about like our planet's revolution around the sun, for example. A revolution is a turn around something, right? So this would be one revolution, right? One circle, right? So the word itself tells us where revolutions lead, right back to where we started. A revolution brings us back to where we started. And history is an agreement. One ruling class replaces another. One ideology replaces another. One flag replaces another. But the machinery underneath remains unchanged. The cycle continues. Revolution changes who holds power. It rarely changes humanity's relationship to power. And then a thought occurred to me because I love words. I love thinking about their meaning. And here's what I discovered. At least I think I discovered it. Okay. Revolution is evolution that is fueled or motivated by rage. The people have had enough. They can't take it anymore. There needs to be a change, but it's fueled by rage. And usually it's performed in violence, right? So, what would evolution fueled by love look like? I think it would look like this. Pardon my horrible handwriting. If you can read that, evolution fueled by love is levolution. And how cool is that? A civilization evolving through love, not through rage, not through greed, not through superiority, love. Because every revolution fueled by hatred eventually reproduces the very thing it sought to replace. Violence preserves the logic of violence. Fear reproduces fear. Oppression reproduces oppression. History demonstrates this again and again. Levolution begins somewhere else. It begins within. Because every system is ultimately an outward expression of human consciousness. If fear organizes our hearts, fear will organize our institutions. But if love begins organizing our hearts, entirely new kinds of institutions become possible. Imagine schools built around human flourishing instead of competition. Justice rooted in restoration rather than revenge. Economics organized around stewardship rather than endless accumulation. Politics transformed from perpetual conflict into collaborative problem solving. Can you imagine that? Different political parties working together to solve problems for the common good of all? Can you see it? Now, these changes are not because humanity is perfect or has become perfect, but because we've changed the principle around which we organize ourselves. Buckminster Fuller once wrote, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." That, to me, is the levolution. We don't overthrow, we outgrow. We don't conquer, we create. We don't replace one ruler with another or one ideology with another. We replace fear with love as humanity's organizing principle. Big job ahead of us, my friends. Which brings us back to this community. Maybe the center of love isn't here simply to host Sunday gatherings or meditations or interesting talks. Maybe we're here to become something much more important. A living demonstration that another way is indeed possible. People with different beliefs, different experiences, different worldviews, choosing relationship over ideology, curiosity over certainty, compassion over fear, love over separation. Perhaps every great transformation begins this way, not with millions, but with a few people courageous enough to live as though the future has already arrived, leading by example, just as Arno challenges us to do. So when Arno asked me, what is the center of love's mission? I didn't have an answer, embarrassingly enough. But I think I do now. Our mission isn't simply to spread love. It isn't simply to unify all of humanity. No big deal, small goal. Our mission is to quietly embody a new possibility, to demonstrate that people with profound differences can genuinely love one another, to become perhaps the example the world cannot ignore. Because that's how paradigms shift, not through violent revolution, but through levolution. That's how we level up, not through force, but through love. So I'd like to leave you with one final question. For thousands of years, humanity has asked, who should rule us? I think we've been asking the wrong question. I think the better question is, what should rule us? Fear or love? Because whichever one governs our hearts will eventually govern civilization itself. So, may we become people energized by diversity, unified in love, and committed to the ongoing levolution of humanity. That is your mission, should you choose to accept it. And I hope that you will. Thank you.